Hey Wolfpack, and welcome back. I hope all is well, and I hope you enjoyed your week. It's honestly been quite cool out here lately, perfect for sitting around the campfire. Today, we're reading 3 more scary police encounters. If you're a police officer listening to this, have you had anything happen to you before? Comment down below, I'd be very curious to know. With that said, whether you're sitting around a campfire, on the night shift, or even laying in bed, let my voice soothe your nightmares. I'm Jay Miles, and I want to share with you a story that stuck with me for years. I joined the force many decades ago. It was my redemptive way of giving back to society. When I was younger, in my mid-20s, I committed petty crimes in a desperate attempt to fit in. The culture at the time was one that admired bad boys, and having a record was cool to most people. I grew out of that. I was partnerless for some of the 911 calls I have responded to, and I'm just thankful to whatever being exists out there that I had a partner for this call in particular. Our police cruiser was parked in a dark alleyway, tucked between its brick walls so as to catch speeding drivers. It was around 1 a.m. when we received the dispatch. Someone called about a woman who was walking the streets barefoot with her baby while murmuring things to herself. That's all we were told. We arrived at the scene. My partner Rob and I were on edge the moment we got there. Not least because Cinder Valley was a notoriously bad neighborhood. After circling the area a few times, the woman was nowhere to be found, so we decided to park the cruiser and knock on some doors. The 911 caller was anonymous, so we weren't able to speak with them directly. Most folks were asleep at that hour, and we had to settle for whoever happened to be walking the streets that night. "You see that?" said Rob. Someone disappeared behind a wooden gate by a house and we just missed them. Rob and I jogged over to see if we could get this person, our possible suspect. I could see folks in their homes peeking through curtains, staring curiously at 2 cops running around in their neighborhood. It looked like the suspect entered someone's backyard through an opened gate, so we flipped on our flashlights and followed them. The backyard was pitch black and we couldn't see anything that wasn't within a narrow beams of our flashlights. I noticed my partner's light was shaking mildly. "You okay?" I asked him. "I'm fine." "It's okay to be scared, man," I said, chuckling. "Screw off." A rusty swing set moved at the wind and the trees around us sounded their leaves. My body shivered, not at the cold breeze, but at the atmosphere. If I was unsettled, I can only imagine how much more my partner was. "Excuse me, sir." The homeowner suddenly opened their backyard door. "Sorry, ma'am," I said. "We'll be off your property in no time. Didn't mean to scare you. My partner and I are looking for a woman who was reported." "Officer, I can't hear too well. Would you mind coming inside?" I went inside to speak with the homeowner while Rob continued searching the backyard. I explained that we were looking for a woman who was behaving strangely and walking around the neighborhood with a baby in her hand. While talking with the homeowner, Rob screamed from outside. "You okay? What happened?" I asked. It looked as if he had witnessed a ghost appear before his very eyes, then vanish into thin air. "I saw her!" "The woman? What did she look like?" "She..." "Come on, Rob, talk." He took a moment and caught his breath, with his hand over his heart. "She ran up the wall, right in front of me. She ran up that wall, Jay, like an animal." He pointed at the 2-story house. I didn't know what to make of that. Rob didn't have a history of mental illness that I was aware of, and he certainly wasn't on drugs. I knew him, and I knew him for a comfortable amount of time to be able to say with confidence that he would never make things up, especially when it was serious, like police work. "Well," I began awkwardly. "Did you see which way she went after she climbed the wall?" "The bushes! That metal gate over there!" he said, flashing his light at it. "I saw them moving!" With our guns drawn, we hopped over the gate and searched the next-door neighbor's property. "Wait," said Rob. "I heard you call for backup. Shouldn't we wait for them?" "Nah, we can do this, just us two." This backyard was even bigger than the other, but it was just as dark. We aimed our flashlights at a wooden shed sitting at the corner of the yard, and before we took another step towards it, we heard someone crying. It sounded like a baby. "Police!" I knocked on the door of the shed, and we cleared the inside. The woman was not there, but there was a baby, a plastic one. Rob pointed his light at the ground of the shed. "The hell is this?" A mechanical baby doll that could play recorded sounds, placed there by someone for the purpose of luring people, was not something that sat right with me. Not a moment after that, our ears rang at a blood-curdling, high-pitched scream coming from the first house whose backyard we searched. As I dashed back to the other house, I noticed Rob wasn't following. He wasn't even moving. "Let's go! What the hell are you doing?" I yelled. Rob's eyes widened as he glared at me, his mouth agape. I can't. I just can't, Jay. I'm sorry." I didn't have time to argue with him, so I continued on and hopped over the gate and entered the old woman's house. "What's wrong?" I asked her. "I saw her. She was right there." The old woman pointed outside to her backyard, at a spot on the ground that was just by the glass door. "She was just there, just standing and looking at me. I think she smiled." "Okay, which way did she—" Another scream. Rob's. By the time I made it back over to the shed, Rob was nowhere to be found. The plastic baby was gone as well. I called out for him and looked everywhere, but he was simply gone. You know, it was like this mysterious woman could smell fear. It's something she seemed to prey on, and Rob had plenty of it that night. When backup finally arrived, I explained to my higher-ups at least a few hundred times what had transpired. This all took place decades ago, and Rob hasn't been found since. It's a cold case. When I think back on this night, it shivers my spine like nothing else. That mysterious woman, she was playing a game with the two of us, and it feels like she won from experience. I'm not even sure why I'm still referring to her as a woman, as a human being, because if Rob's description of her is any indication, she was definitely something else. A full year has passed by, and I went through different partners. I was stationed in the same city, and sometimes my new partner John and I had to report to calls that came from Cinder Valley. Eventually, I almost forgot about it all, but I never forgot Rob, wherever he was, dead or alive. That didn't last long. One night, while sitting in our cruiser, John and I received a dispatch. It seemed like any other ordinary call, until the operator mentioned something about a woman talking to herself on the street with a crying baby in her hands. I used to be a cop, and I was a damn good one. Yes, I am a little defensive. I remember during my 4-month gauntlet of interviews, explaining that no one would care more about our community than someone from it, and it's true, I did care. You see, I'm from a decent-sized coastal city on the west side of Florida. It's grown in the last 4 years, a new pier and more bars than I could possibly count, all nestled on a peninsula between the sugar sand beaches of the Gulf and Tampa Bay. There was nothing not to love about this place. Well, that was before my last call. September 10th, 2017. 374D, what's your 1020? The dash radio chimed as I sat in a covered garage parking space evading the rain. It had been raining non-stop for the past 5 hours. I had taken to the high ground in anticipation for Hurricane Irma. It was all rain and no wind yet. I was completing my second accident diagram for the evening. 10-4, 10-6 at 13 and 66. I'm busy. I responded, and remembered to dock my computer so the communication center could find my location again. With a hollow click, it locked into place and my position updated. Shortly after doing so, I received a new call. I should have known to watch my tone with the dispatcher, as this was not punishment. I immediately checked who else was available, and of course, 274B, aka Officer Do-Nothing Douglas, was milking a suspicious person call. He got off in 2 hours, and I'm pretty sure he'd still be on that call before returning to the station 30 minutes before he clocked out. The call I received was an unattended death in a neighborhood back near Jungle Prada. I was familiar with the neighborhood. It was my job to be, of course. Like I said, I was a good officer. The old brick streets were starting to flood a little around the curbs where the storm drains had already drank their fill. I arrived at the gated home and buzzed enter. I checked my tough book to see if the caller supplied a code. Star 63315. With a long monotone beep, the black iron gate slid open, unobstructing the Spanish-inspired villa. A round driveway led me to the front door of the home. The closer I got, my headlights showed that the home was in need of upkeeping. A small shadow of a woman stepped outside of the large mahogany front doors as she turned on the lights to a foyer. I parked behind the idling fire rescue truck. "Ma'am?" I reached out my hand to shake hers, while tugging at the collar of my rain jacket with the other. "Sorry for your loss." "Oh, well, thank you. I'm not really sure how to respond." She shook my hand and made no motion to let me in. "He promised he'd never leave me." I could see that she'd been crying. Her nose looked raw and red, as her liver-spotted hand rubbed a monogrammed handkerchief across the tulle of her nose. TDH. The old woman with gray tendrils falling from under her nightcap stared at me with piercing, graying blue eyes. "Ma'am, where are the medics?" Oh yes, they're in the greenhouse out back. Are you not a medic?" "No, ma'am. I'm Officer Knowles." "Oh, they let women be officers now?" The old crone started walking into the dimly lit home. "Yes, in year 2017 they sure do." I smiled and followed her. I grimaced slightly, waiting for her follow-up with something racist, but she didn't. She led me to the rear of the home to a huge backyard dotted with palms of all sizes. The medics were waiting in the screened-in back porch area. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I got it from here, but we'll be back to speak with you shortly. Do you have anyone you can call to sit with you?" She frowned. "Now, how did you know my name?" "You told the call taker when you called in." I nodded and tried to make my tired brown eyes look as kind as they could, despite the dimly lit lamp's lack of help in the hallway. A veteran medic sighed and patted Mrs. Henderson on the back. "We'll call her daughter to come sit with her. She's coming from Okla, so it might be a while because of the rain. Morals has everything for you." Morals, the younger medic of the two, had a sleeve and looked a lot like Mario Lopez. He smiled and walked with me to the shed. "Yeah, sweet lady, but she's not all there. Let's just say Mrs. Henderson was a cougar, though. Anyway, this is Mr. Henderson," he said, while he motioned a gloved hand at the man on the floor with only a small dish rag on his face. Mr. Henderson had his plain white shirt pulled up, exposing spotted bluish-white chest, with the medic stickers sporadically placed on his chest. "She found him like this at 2320. We called him at 2346, he continued. "Oh, and got these for you." He handed me 2 pill bottles. I sighed and told him thank you as he left to the next call. I got my laptop from my car and set up a makeshift desk on one of the shelves on the perimeter wall in the greenhouse. The wind and the rain started to pick up, so I closed the door to it. The greenhouse was an old glass greenhouse, with herbs and exotic plants I couldn't tell you the names of. A small single bulb hung from the ceiling and swayed, casting shadows. "Just you and me, Mr. Henderson." I pulled on my gloves and squatted beside him. A draft pulled the greenhouse door open and shut, rattling the glass windows. I took off the dish towel I assumed Mrs. Henderson placed over his face. I suspected she saw it in a movie, and did her best to mimic it as a way to show her respect. I pulled his dull brown eyelids open to check for petechia. Carefully, I rubbed my hands through his distinguished gray hair, before rolling the body to check for suspicious wounds, bumps, contusion, or blood. Lividity had settled in on his lower back, indicating he hadn't been moved. After not finding anything suspicious, I left him to rest on his back. He was much younger than I was expecting, in his 50s, while Mrs. Henderson had to be at least 80. I called the medical examiner after counting the 1 bottle of his pills and calling the primary care physician on the pill bottle's label. He explained that he was not surprised Mr. Henderson passed away. Apparently, he had colon cancer and never bothered following up. The doctor scoffed and explained Mr. Henderson was wanting to find holistic treatment. He explained the pills were ibuprofen and Viagra. I started typing my report out while I waited for the coroner. The wind picked up and the lights began to flicker. I peered outside before catching a glimpse of my reflection, and I looked at the body on the floor, and I swear, his chest looked as if it was doing the slowest exhale. I turned my attention back to my laptop. The light again flickered, then went out. I turned to my flashlight that accompanied the soft glow of my laptop and began looking around, leveling my flashlight around the room. Shadows grew and vanished as I surveyed the small place. My breathing deepened as I heard the door bang shut once more. I turned around now, breathing deeply. I tried as hard as I could to level my voice before calling to dispatch over the radio. 374D, can you please send another? Are you 10-4? 10-4, just need someone to stand by with Mrs. Henderson. I lied. The crackle of the radio filled the room as it paralleled the sound of heavy raindrops. 374D, as soon as someone becomes available, I'll send them. Basically, she wouldn't send anyone. I kept my hand on the swivel, setting my flashlight on the door at the back of the greenhouse. I didn't notice it before, but it made sense that there would be one. I don't imagine a garden hose would reach so far back. As I stepped closer to the blocked door, my laptop snapped closed with a metallic slap. I turned around, pushing down on the butt of the gun, and forward, rocking my gun loose from the holster. "Police!" I yelled, now sweating as heat and humidity raised from my vest. "Who's there?" I walked towards the only unblocked door in the greenhouse, my gun leveled and supported by my wrist, shining my flashlight towards the door. I scanned down towards the floor, towards Mr. Henderson, or where he was. "Are you 10-4? A raspy voice erupted, like a hand into soil, grabbing my attention through the white noise of the rain, whispered from behind me. "Are you 10-4? Heat and the stench of a thawed and rotting refrigerator sounded my face and moved up my nostrils. It smelled like death, and I ran. I did not look back. I drove quietly to the station, handed over my badge and gun, and let them know where they could find my laptop. I don't know what happened to Mrs. Henderson, but in that moment, I didn't care. Judge me if you will, I was a good cop, and to be honest, over the course of my 7 years being an officer, there were others that just had the steady, subtle rise and fall as I wrote up reports about their deaths. They watched me as I watched them. They just never spoke. This story is for my friend Kelly Rothwell. We will always keep looking for you. It's J. Miles again, a cop with a useless English degree, here with another story. You may remember my last one, but if not then, that's fine, as there's no need to read these stories in order. They are my foggy accounts of events that took place many decades ago, and while some are difficult to remember, others are quite clear and very memorable. My partner John and I were dispatched to a bar around 11:12 p.m. "There's someone crying in the dumpster." That's what the caller told the operator. John lowered the passenger window and stuck his hand out as I reversed our cruiser from the diner. "This is what we gotta cancel our lunch break for? I'm calling it now. Just some drunk guy." We arrived at the bar and saw a woman waiting by the entrance, smoking a cigarette, her shoulders to her ears. She took a last puff and pressed it against a brick wall. "He's over there," she said, raising her chin towards the alleyway. "I just want to close the bar up and get home already. These homeless people, I don't have time for their games." John seemed to agree as he leaned against the cruiser, arms crossed and yawning. "Okay," he began. "We'll take it from here. Head on home, ma'am." As she walked back to her car, the woman stopped and looked back. "Oh, and by the way, he keeps apologizing about something. I don't even know, fellas. Probably drunk, but very emotional about whatever he did." The streets and sidewalks were empty, except for many stray cats and dogs and a skunk or two. The stench from the alleyway was like moldy cheese, not to mention alcohol and urine. It all comes with the job, of course. Would I prefer the title of an FBI agent who battles white-collar crimes under the AC of his cubicle? Yes, but this job has its thrills of its own, ones that never bore. I gave John a look, You want to get in there? Do your job? Me? Come on, officer. He joked. You're supposed to take me under your wing. All those years of experience. I could learn a thing or two from your old ass. Okay, fair enough. Just thought your bald spot would reflect the moonlight and blind the suspect for us. Make our jobs easier, you know? We made our way between the buildings, where there was only black. The sodium street lights casted our shadows onto the wall, like a couple of armed men pursuing a burglar in a cartoon. John cursed when he stepped into a puddle and turned his flashlight at the ground. Wait, I said, my hand on his chest. You hear that? We listened in. Drops of water fell through a drain and splashed deep underground. A family of rats scratched somewhere in the corners. Crispy leaves brushed against concrete, and a mysterious man sobbed. That woman was right. This man was sincere in his cries. We couldn't understand most of what he uttered, not least because he was hiding and speaking in gentle whispers. Still the words, "I'm so sorry," and "God forgive me," were audible and repeated. There was something off about the man's voice as well. Perhaps it was slouchy because he was drunk. Each word was droopy, falling off his mouth like a bowling ball rolling over a cliff. I flashed my light in his way and saw his hunched shadow, but not him. He pulled patches of hair from his head as he rocked back and forth on the ground, leaning his back on the dumpster. His cries and wails, although low, were the stuff of nightmares. They stiffened my bones and put me on alert for any sudden movement on his part, and I could feel the same happening to John, who was following close behind. I tapped my shoes against wet concrete. "Sir?" He ignored me and rambled on. "We got a call from a concerned citizen. Said someone was crying in the alleyway," I said. Still, nothing. I looked over my shoulder. "Johnny boy, now's your chance. Go help the man and let's get out of here." John hesitated a moment, then flashed his light at the man and approached him. The man moved so that his back was to us, and we could see the missing hair from his head, but we still hadn't identified him. All the information he gave us were his constant apologies for some crime he claims to have committed. "I'm so sorry, God, please forgive me." John squinted and leaned towards him. "You see that?" The man's earlobes dripped blood. Suddenly, a scream, not from the man, but across the alleyway by the park. We rushed towards it, leaving him behind. We ran towards whatever we believed was an actual emergency, an actual situation that needed our attention, but the truth was that my partner and I were glad to have an excuse to get the hell out of that alleyway, and as far away as possible from that man. When we reached the park, we found a woman, panting and crying, with a barking German shepherd at her side. Her hands cupped her mouth and nose as she retreated from the dead body on the ground. Some poor old lady lay on the park pathway, her face missing. The jogging woman suddenly let out another blood-curdling scream as she jumped and pointed at someone behind us. It was the man. He followed us from the alleyway, and when we saw him, we knew why his words sounded slouched and muffled. We knew why he apologized over and over again. We knew now what he had done. "Please, I didn't mean to," he yelled, grabbing at his eyes and limping towards us. The man had somehow stitched someone else's face over his own, and it looked like that of a woman's, an older one. We put two and two together and arrested him for the woman's murder. He cried and yelled and even charged the paramedics, proclaiming his innocence even after confessing. He said he was forced to do what he did, claiming that if he hadn't, then the man in the sewer would come for him. When John and I finished our reports that night and got back into our cruiser, there was silence. I knew then that he was a changed man, this rookie. Myself? Not so much, but although I had experienced these things before, they never failed to petrify me. I knew of the sleepless nights to come from this experience. I gave John a lecture with the side of my eye as I turned the key and drove us out of there, opening his window for him. "Have some fresh air, buddy." But he was expressionless, and with each streetlight we drove under, I saw the sweat on his forehead and around his eyes. I didn't tell John what I'm about to tell you. He wouldn't have been able to handle it. When we finally got in the cruiser and reversed out of there, I saw something. John couldn't get in the car and slam the door quick enough, but I took my time, and by doing so, I witnessed it. As I put my hand on the driver's side door to open it, I caught a glow in the distance. Down the street, I saw a pair of glowing eyes descend into the ground, back into the sewer, closing the cap over itself. Thanks for listening, Wolfpack. If you want to submit your own story, the links for my email and subreddit will be down below. I've also created a Discord, so if you want to join that, the link will be in the description down below as well. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And with that said, have beautiful nightmares, and I will see you next time.